Well, it wouldn't be a me stream if it didn't start off scuffed. Anyway, hi. So I'll just quickly repeat myself. This time, at least not minutes into the stream. Um, but hi. So, um, I want to start off by saying that I just had to scarf down something for dinner because I was so focused on setting things up that I just completely forgot to eat. Whoopsie daisies. Excuse me. I will also cough. Honestly, I just wait to cough because I just wait to say because it's so common for you to be muted. Listen, it's not on purpose. Your name escapes me. I'm so sorry. But purple. Like every time I see purple, I just know it's you, girl. I just know it's you. Anyway, so above my noggin, exclusively I have added content warnings. Because of course I'm going to be talking about World War I, which means I'm going to be talking about a lot of things that could make people uncomfortable. There will also be pictures, but of course, partially because I am not a crazy person and partially because, you know, Twitch would have my ass, I'm not going to show anything gruesome. I'm going to show some prosthesis, and I'm just going to show pictures of people, not necessarily warfare. I'm going to show a picture of a city that was destroyed, but nothing too horrendous, you know? Literally, I've been practicing this since Nana put the idea in my head. But before we get into the nitty gritty of it all, how are you guys doing? Because it's been a minute since I've streamed. For those unaware, one of the reasons that I didn't stream for a while is because I, one, went on a trip, and two, I came back with COVID, and I was very, very sick. Fever, cough, you know, the whole 9 yards. It was not fun. Do not recommend. I'm still kind of recovering. I will cough, but I'm gonna try and lean away from the mic as much as possible. But yeah, Nana. Considering you were in the void, I'm surprised you're awake right now. I've also had entirely too much caffeine today. So if I talk really fast or I'm very animated, that is why. I didn't have Monster though, Nana, so don't come for me. Good lord. Half a cup of coffee? I'm not gonna say anything about how much coffee I drink. You couldn't find your Monster. I do have one in my fridge because I'm like now destined to find a new flavor. But I have yet to drink it. I don't feel like drinking it right now. Anyway. Okay. How do I even kick this off? How do I start this? Let's do some audience participation. Also, it annoys me that my chat is in front of my model. Do you guys maybe have something that you specifically want me to start with? Like, I have so many pictures pre-loaded to make this a full-on show and tell. I'm excited. This has been my hyperfixation since, like, I was 17 years old. So, how do you get the idea? Okay, so I'm gonna try and combine the two, because I do kind of mesh. So I'm a big history nerd, right? And I have been into World War I since I saw a story about the Christmas truce during history class. In case you're unfamiliar, the Christmas truce, it's partially, the way we know it is partially fabricated. But what happened was that at the time everyone thought, oh, we're gonna be home before Christmas. This isn't gonna take very long. And then it ended in, you know, during Christmas time. I'm gonna turn this music down, or at least mute it on my end. There we go. But they thought like, oh, we're gonna be home for Christmas. And then they were in the trenches, wet, cold, miserable, missing home. And as the story goes, a song started rising from the German trenches. The English joined in, the French joined in. They all came out of their trenches, met at the middle, played a game of soccer. The soccer thing is made up. There is no actual proof that the Germans played soccer against the English. There were soccer matches, sure, but those happened behind the front lines between the English among themselves, not between the warring countries. Blah. But that wormed its way into my head, and I have the bug for it ever since. And I'm fascinated by it. But I also want to say, because I feel like I also need to kind of like clarify myself, because I know that people who have an interest in by the way, about the Christmas truce, there were, of course, people that were against it. One of them being Mustache Man, because he fought in World War I and he made that his whole personality for a while. And they tried it again the second year, but that didn't go very well. Sorry, now I have stage fright. But oh, God damn it, it went so well. Oh, right. I was going to give a bit of a disclaimer, because I know that people who have an interest in either of the world wars, really, have a bit of a bad reputation, right? And just like rehearse. Literally, I was pacing around my coffee table for some reason, just waving a book around that will come into play right now. But to kind of clarify that I'm not one of those red flag people that's oh, think of all the machinery and the killing and da-da-da-da-da. No, I am into it from a stance of how did people personally deal with it? How did they cope with being away from home or missing their loved ones or scarcity of food or all these things, that happened during the war? The people interest me and their experiences interest me. Because it's easy to say, oh, at the Battle of the Somme, there were this many casualties and this many wounded. Every single one of those numbers, that's a person. Those are people. That's someone's uncle, son, brother, cousin, husband, boyfriend. That is a person. It's not just a number. That was someone who either got drafted or enlisted and went there and then ended up, dying. And I find the people a lot more interesting than the grand scheme of things. It's all interesting, but, that is my very, very specific niche. Hold on. And I kind of want to kick this off, I suppose, with a poem by Wilfred Owen, who's a poet but wrote a lot of war poetry. Actually, hold on. That's not what I meant to do. Where is he? It's this gentleman right here. And the reason why I want to start off with this poem is because at the time, at least at the start of the war, though it kind of persisted throughout, and we'll come back to this time and again, I feel, this feels like a show and tell. But there was a kind of general attitude, I guess you could say, that, to die for your country is the best thing you can do as a person. And you need to, especially in England, you need to enlist and die for your country and this, that, and the third. And being a soldier is such an honorable thing to be. And, all this very patriotic nonsense, right? And when we get to propaganda eventually, I'll point this out again. And any sort of anti-war sentiment was also discouraged and censored to a certain degree. And the poem by him that I want to read to you it's gonna be kind of difficult to listen to, but it's called Dulce et Decorum Est. And it just reeks of anti-war sentiment and just kind of anger towards people at the home front who still live in this delusion of like, oh, it's such a glorious thing to enlist and to die for your country and to do all these things. And this just like, I'll read it to you. It'll do a better job of explaining than me just rambling. Also, why am I so warm? Anyway, dulce et decorum est. Bent double like old beggars in their sacks, knock-kneed coughing like hags, we cursed through the sludge till on the haunting flares we turned our backs, and towards our distant rest we began to trudge. Men marched to sleep, many had lost their boots, but limped on bloodshod. All went lame, all blind, drunk with fatigue, deaf even to the hoots of tired, outstripped 5-9s that dropped behind. Gas! Gas! Quick, boys! An ecstasy of fumbling, fitting the clumsy helmets just in time, but someone was still yelling out and stumbling and floundering like a man in fire or lime, dim through the misty panes and thick green light, as under a green sea I saw him drowning. In all my dreams, before my helpless sight, he plunges at me, guttering, choking, drowning. If in some smothering dream you too could pace behind the wagon that we flung him in, and watch the white eyes withering in his face, his hanging face like a devil sick of sin. If you could hear at every jolt the blood come gargling from froth-corrupted lungs, obscene as cancer, bitter as the cut of vile, incurable sores on innocent tongues. My friend, you would not tell with such high zest to children ardent for some desperate glory the old lie, dulce et decorum est, pro patria mori. The sad thing, by the way, about Wilfred Owen is that he died very shortly before the armistice, which, when I found that out, that just made me sad. Excuse me. Nana, don't worry. Like you've had a busy travel day. You listen. It's okay. But I find that poem specifically interesting because, like I said earlier, there was a very much like a sentiment of like, oh, to die for your country, like, yes, that is so honorable. And the UK specifically encouraged this too by having like an entire, like, all people from the same street in the same battalion and stuff like that. They were called PALS battalions. Problem with that, however, was if there was an attack or like a bomb dropped in the trench with all people from the same area, that had horrible, I've not been speaking enough English, that had horrible repercussions for back home, because suddenly an entire street was wiped off the map, which is not great, of course. Another thing about this, the human aspect of it that really interests me is that at the start of the war, and this is a cute little anecdote. Well, it's cute in my opinion. But at the start of the war, a certain gentleman named Kitchener called for knitted goods. This is him. He may look familiar, but I feel like this would ring more bells with you guys. That's one hell of a mustache, isn't it? Well, our dear friend Kitchener here called for knitted goods. Though he wasn't the first, of course. But the problem was that the people back home knitted stuff with like one person in mind, or with the yarn they had. And that would be like sweaters, socks, the whole 9 yards, everything you might need if you're in a cold, wet trench at the front. And that sometimes would be in very unfortunate colors. So eventually the Red Cross, I believe, wrote like standard uniform patterns with standard colors so that, if a pair of socks was sent to the front, it could be worn by anyone, not just Jimmy from down the block, right? Do I have it? Yes, I do. Our friend Kitchener, that is not what I meant to move. Our friend Kitchener, at the start of the war, let me move that a bit so y'all can see, put this in the newspaper, calling for 300,000 belts, and those are cholera belts. They were worn around the waist, and 300,000 pairs of socks, knitted by the good people back home. And fun fact, to me, this is a fun fact. There will be times where I will be talking and I will say fun fact, and what follows is in fact not fun, but it is a fact. But this is a genuinely kind of fun one, I think. But one of the things Kitchener kept stressing when asking for socks is a lump-free toe, because, you know, you had to wear socks, and with trench foot being a problem, and the British turned this into a moral thing, mind you, saying like, oh, like, if you have trench foot, or like, that is a problem, that is a moral failing, you're not keeping clean, and be sure to check your mates and make sure they keep clean and stuff like that. And, you know, he's just a lump-free toe to avoid chafing and avoid, you know, wounds which would turn into infections, which in the worst case could lead to amputation. And our dear friend Kitchener now has also lent his name to a very popular stitch to graft the front of a sock together that is still being used today. This is just like the best one I could. It's just on a pouch. I kind of want that pouch because I always have to Google how to do a Kitchener stitch. You'd think I'd know by now with how much socks I've knitted, but that is still a thing that has carried over into the modern day from World War One. There's a lot of things. You'd be surprised at how much happened or like has carried over from that to now. Hold on. I've been ignoring chat. I'm so sorry. It's sad that they just had honor, fought for their life, but they were humans who didn't deserve to. Exactly. God damn it, my thoughts got derailed. Also, another fun fact, and this is again a fun fact. At the start of the war, uniforms were still very, like, almost parade dress, right? Because before World War One was like the real first instance of modern warfare as we would know it, with like machine guns and mass casualties and stuff like that. And before that, it was still very much kind of like a Napoleonic thing of like, oh, this is fought with honor and gentlemen's agreements, and, you know, all this pomp and circumstance and all that. And thusly, which is why we have like the pin helms, like the Pickelhaube. I think I probably butchered that, and if there are any German-speaking people in chat or watching, I am terribly sorry. But the little pin on the Germans' helmets was actually to ward off sabers, to give you an idea of how antiquated that was. And the French, do yourself a favor and Google. Or wait, I can just show you, but it requires a bit of extra steps because I knew that I forgot something. But at the start of the war, the French sent their men to the front in red pants and a blue overcoat. Hold on. Yeah, that's a good illustration. Can I just... No, I can't. Okay, that's a shame. But let me pull this up for y'all. Because I want to kind of make a joke based off of this. There we go. There he is. There we are. That is what the French wore at the start of the war. A lot of the soldiers at the time were more or less 16, 17, right? Bit of a misconception. There were people that did enlist and lied about their age. I believe the youngest were like 12, 13 years old, but not the majority. England specifically actually had one of the best and professional armies, and all of those men were like of like proper fighting age, if you will. But back on this uniform for a sec, the keen and anime watching observer might have realized something. Are y'all familiar with the anime Hetalia? Because if you Google France, that is what he's wearing. I'm going to prove this because I think it is fucking hilarious. All roads lead back to this hell anime. Hold on, it's being annoying. It does kind of look like the hold on. For those who don't feel like googling or can't, this is France from Hetalia. You can see where the inspiration was found. Okay, let's put that away and let's stare back at Kitchener. Sorry, on my other monitor, I still have my search results open, and I was such a, like into that hell anime when I was a teenager. The instrument's age was 18 to 40 minus one's. Indeed, Lady Dami. But again, it was incredibly fucking easy to lie about your age at the time, and there were often instances of like people just going like, yeah, sure, why not? This is a thing I found out doing some genealogy because I am directly related to a World War One veteran who was decorated. And I was looking into one of my ancestors' medals, and one of the reasons that you could get this medal is if you enlisted but you were younger than 18 or older than I think 45. And sorry, I don't know why I decided to drink in the middle of my sentence. But yeah. And another thing that is I feel very, very strongly. I'm gonna put Kitchener away. I feel very, very strongly about this topic, and I'll share some personal anecdotes. Because if you are in my Discord server, you may have seen my actual literal trenches joke, and you might know that a while ago in May, I went on a 3-day trip to an area in my country that is still, the war lives and breathes there. There's a lot of cemeteries, and technically the entire town was destroyed. It was almost entirely just bombarded flat. I have a picture. Where is it? That's what it looked like. And I believe that is the church. And this is the Lakenhalle, which is turned into a museum. And I believe my hotel was like over here somewhere. But, or here? It doesn't matter. But this was what it would look like, right? And originally, after the war, England was like, hey, guys, so how about you leave this the way it is and we'll fund you rebuilding your city just a couple miles down the road. What about it, huh? And people living there were like, no, and rebuilt everything from the ground up. So if you stand there, almost everything you see around you is no older than 1918. And when I arrived there, like, I got off the train with my backpack on my back, like, really excited to be there because I needed to be away for a bit. And this is my hyperfixation. This is something that I'm incredibly passionate about. If you get to know me, one of the first things you'll find out about me is how passionate I am about World War One. And hold on. Talking a lot is hard on my throat. I'm still recovering from being sick. But I got off the train. I need to watch my tone and my words. And I was walking through the streets towards this area right here because I wanted to spend some time in the museum because I couldn't check in yet. And I looked down because I always look down for some reason. Probably autism. And I see these on the floor. Well, it was originally just one, right? And I think, oh, someone dropped a key. Tee-hee. I go down. I try to pick it up. It is cemented to the floor. So I get up embarrassed and I move forward. And then throughout the weekend, I keep seeing these keys on the floor. And it wasn't until my last day that I had the actual like idea of like, let's Google what these are about. Every single one of those keys has a name and a date on it. And those are names and the death dates of civilian casualties. Which made me go quiet for a bit. And as I was killing time until I could check into my hotel and leave my heavy as fuck backpack there, because I had a lot planned my first day. That was lunacy. I walked almost 20k steps. I went to a cemetery nearby because there are a lot, and I mean a lot of cemeteries in that specific corner of my country. And I'm a crybaby, right? And I go to this cemetery and I'm like walking around and it's all these identical white headstones with names on them and a cross, sometimes a Star of David, sometimes nothing. And a lot of them said known unto God, which means that we have no fucking clue who was in the ground there, right? We don't know the identity of the gentleman who was interred, but there were like plenty with names. And I didn't notice that a lot of them said the age of the person who passed away until I stood still in front of one, and I was kind of like looking, and I saw age 19. And I was like recording a voice note for a friend of mine, and like you can hear like my tone change, and I'm starting to be a little misty eyed and. But I had to leave because I was like really starting to cry, and there were like people working in the cemetery. I was like, I don't want them to see me cry, so I left. And I had a similar moment. And this is another cool sort of like human thing that you can still visit. And that is, where is it? Talbot House. And this is a picture of back in the day. And this is in Poperinge. Yeah, Poperinge. It still exists today. It is still being maintained. And it's partially a museum, partially a hotel. And I really want to stay there. But Talbot House was founded in 1915. And they're probably very used to the crying. I definitely would have. They might not have minded. I would have, because I don't like crying in public. This was founded in 1915 and is still being operated to this day. And it was founded by this delightful gentleman, nicknamed Tubby. His actual name escapes me. Apologies for that. But this is Talbot House. And this was founded because around Poperinge, and you're going to hear my accent come out because I refuse to say the town names in the Americanized way because this is my country. By the way, quick side tangent. You know, with France and with Belgium and all these things, the English-speaking soldiers had a lot of problems saying some town names. So they would give them nicknames. Like Ypres became Wipers. There were more, but that's the only one that I know off the top of my head. Anyway, Poperinge, Talbot House. Around Poperinge was basically just like one sort of giant tent city where men stayed when they were not near the front lines, because the front lines were not very far from that town. And, you know, where soldiers are who have not been home or have not seen a woman in a while, and a town where women do live, you know, trouble is a brewing. And our dear friend Tubby here was tasked with making a place where this sort of nonsense wouldn't happen, but the soldiers could still kind of like stop thinking about the war for a bit. So he found a Talbot House. And in it was a library, there was a theater where soldiers put on performances for each other. They currently still have like a projector and a screen where they play a recording of a show that would have been performed at the time. I didn't have the patience to sit through it. But sorry, I got a DM from someone. And I've actually picnicked in the garden. The garden is absolutely gorgeous. It is really well kept, and there's like a little chapel in the back. And I there was an incredibly delightful Scottish lady, a volunteer, who helped me throughout the whole thing. I love her. I love her so much. Anyway, Talbot House is just kind of like a place where soldiers could just kind of be, right? And the fun thing about, well, fun is objective, but the interesting thing about this is that as soon as you set foot in Talbot House, your rank stayed at the door. Didn't matter if you were a private, if you were a general, if you were a lieutenant, didn't matter. The second you stepped into Talbot House, you were John Smith from Willoughby. You were Douglas Macmillan from Edinburgh. It didn't matter. You were just a guy. You were not your rank. And Tubby himself is also a very interesting character because after the war, Talbot House closed for a while and then he reopened it, I believe, if I remember correctly. And he had multiple houses all over the US, Canada, UK, this one here. And he helped the families of veterans and people who died during the war. He helped veterans who had hit hard times. By the way, something I forgot to mention is that Tubby was a reverend. He in this effort kind of embodies what you're supposed to do when you're a Christian, but we're not going to delve into religion. But this is a really cool space to be. But the thing that once again got me in fucking tears was, hold on, this place. And I want to say I'm not very religious. I was brought up Roman Catholic, but I do not practice. It is not a part of my life anymore. But I went into the actual Talbot House because it exists out of two different buildings. And this is the attic and the chapel. We have to go up a very narrow set of stairs to get up there. And I was the only person in there. And it was quiet and you could kind of hear like the house settle in the way that old houses do, like the creaking. And I'd already kind of gone around the room, just kind of looked at everything. And then I sat down right here. Hold on, can I move myself? I'm not going to start doing that. But I sat there, I was staring at the altar, and just, I got this really heavy feeling in my chest. And I just started bawling. Because, and this was a thing that was brought up time and again. Men got baptized there because they were scared of going back and not coming home. And all that nonsense. And, well, that's maybe a disrespectful way of saying it, but I just sat there. And I'm maybe a little bit too empathic for my own good. But I just sat there and I just was thinking, like, what a horrendous feeling must that have been? To sit there through mass or just to pray on your own, knowing that maybe tomorrow you might not be there anymore. And I was just sitting there like, and I left a little bit after. But it was a really weird feeling, and I cannot explain it. It was like, I don't want to say supernatural, because that feels offensive, but it was heavy. It was very, very heavy. But that is another thing that really interests me is like how did they deal with this? Poorly, I would imagine. Because the World War I is also when we see PTSD on a bigger scale than before. At the time it was called shell shock, and it was also seen as something cowardly. And it was not fully understood, but it was the first steps into trying to like understand what warfare did to a man's psyche. And another advancement that came from World War I is prosthesis. Because another thing, if you think World War I, you think, well, at least I do, you think of the injuries and the amputations that had to happen. Because being wounded in a less than sanitary environment, you know, you're going to get an infection and that is going to, you know, have detrimental feelings. Or also a thing was that some of the shells used were made specifically to injure and not kill. One of them that comes to mind, I forgot the actual name of it, but what the shell did was it would fall, but it had a delayed explosion. So it kind of like burrow half in the ground and then it would explode and it would send shrapnel, daisy cutters, that was what they were called, and it would send shrapnel in all directions, like about the height of your ankle, roughly. So you can imagine, not a lot of ankles were left unscathed if one of those things exploded. And it was, of course, not just your legs, but those things did horrible, horrible things. Um, I'm not gonna show, of course, because one, Twitch won't let me, and two, that's not the kind of thing that you show kind of unprompted, I guess. But there were a lot of men that got injured in their face specifically. I do not recommend Googling this if you don't have a strong stomach, because some of them are very rough to look at. But like men whose jaw would be missing pieces or their nose would be gone or something like that. And then after the war, all these men with their healed wounds and everything stuck out like a sore thumb. And that is where Anna Coleman Ladd came in. And as you can see, this is a facial prosthesis. I don't know what happened to this gentleman in specific. Could be that, his jaw was injured. Maybe he's missing his nose. I don't know. I haven't seen pictures of him without his prosthesis. But she is an American sculptor, or was, because she has passed for almost 100 years now. And she helped make a lot of prosthesis specifically to give these men a more normal experience in life despite their injuries. I have a picture of some of the prostheses she helped make. These are fairly common from what I've been able to find. It's just like a set of glasses with a nose and a mustache. Kind of reminds me of like those joke glasses. But this was an easy way for it to be attached to the face and not come off quickly. And plastic surgery also made a lot of advancements in the wake of the war. One of the things that, and it's gonna sound gross when I explain it, because it kind of is. But one of the ways they kind of figured out how to have extra skin without having to take grafts from other pieces of the body is if someone, for example, is missing a piece of their jaw and it's like kind of like a bit of an open wound and it needs a skin graft. They would make a sort of tube on another area of the face, and over the course of months, they would walk this skin tube to the affected area, kind of cut it open and use it as a skin graft. It sounds gruesome, but it's fascinating. Okay, hold on. I've been ignoring chat again. If you ever get the chance to come to the USA, there's a Marine Museum outside Quantico, based in Virginia. They have lots of information about World War I. This is really cool. I do plan on eventually going to World War I, but I'll be more area, Alabama, Florida, that kind of place, because that's where the people that I care about live. So, hold on. What else do I have here? Oh, this is another thing where I had a moment of like crying, and I'm gonna admit to something that I'm probably gonna be embarrassed about later on. I'm already embarrassed. I don't even have said it before. But this is the Meneport, and it's in Ypres, and this is a memorial for the Commonwealth soldiers. And it has, hold on, let me Google. It has 54,604 names of men from the Commonwealth. So think Canada, Australia, India, the UK, anyone who was missing in action, his name was put on there. And it is very, very spine-chilling to stand there and see these names, the lists, floor to ceiling of names. And it's not only like in here, there's also like on either side, there's like a little step up and like a little garden on either side with even more names. Every fucking square inch. And every night at 8 p.m. they blow the Lost Post, and they've done that since the 20s. Almost uninterrupted. They did stop briefly during World War II, but it's basically been uninterrupted since. Even during COVID, which I find impressive, for lack of a better term. Excuse me. But on my last day of my little trip, I went there, and I want to paint you a picture. So just imagine me, right? Heavy backpack, because I already had to check out of my hotel. I got a coffee, which was absolute garbage, which made me mad. I couldn't find a good cup of coffee my entire weekend, which made me very grouchy. Um, and in Talbot House, they also sell rose plants, specifically of a genus called Talbot House, which was made for like the 100-year anniversary. And I really liked plants, so I got one. But imagine me, heavy as fuck backpack on my back, cup of mediocre coffee, my little baggie with my rose plant, and I'm marching to the Meneport. Just kind of like, I want to just like go here and kill some time because I have to wait at least like 30 more minutes before my train. So I go, and I stand there, and it's early in the morning, and I'm alone with my mediocre cup of coffee. Yes, I'm gonna keep complaining about that. And I'm looking at all these names. And then it starts. And I don't know what came over me, but as I stood there, I looked at all these names and I went like tears streaming down my face in fucking public, going, it's so unfair that I get to go home and none of you did. I know that is really silly and embarrassing to admit, but that happens. And then I had to promptly leave because two people on bikes stopped to kind of look at everything, and I was like, I don't want to be seen crying, so I left. But it is really, if you stop and think about it, because it's easy to be desensitized to these kind of things, but if you stop and think about it, every single one of those names, every single one of those 54,604 names, that was a person. And I went to a different, I think it was Bussendal that I went to. It was like a 20-minute bus ride from where I was at to where I was going. And I counted, on the 20-minute bus ride, we passed 5 military cemeteries. And not small ones. If you're curious, the biggest one, the biggest Commonwealth cemetery in the world is in Ipet. Or close, no wait, not Ipet. It's close to Ipet and Passendale. That's Tyne Cot. I've been there. It's just a sea of headstones. It is very chilling. Same thing happened to me in New York. I visited a certain museum. It didn't seem fair that I was there. Yeah, I felt that the entire time I was on my little World War One war tourism trip, I suppose. Especially when I saw some of like the graves with like very young men. I was like, this is unfair. This is so unfair. Because some of these men died for like, God forbid, 2 steps worth of land. Especially well, there we go, my accent came out. Near Ipet and Passendale, they're the most like brutal fighting on the Western Front happened. And tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of men lost their lives for, God forbid, a few meters. Hold on, I'm gonna look up the casualty numbers because I want to know for sure. Casualties. The Allies suffered over 250,000 casualties. I've been there for the last post, so it's probably too much to really appreciate at the time. Oh, nice. Yeah. It is very... I don't know. Again, I stood there kind of like misty-eyed. But I was also standing next to possibly one of the like most... And I don't want to be mean, but I'm going to be mean. One of the most ignorant British people I've ever come across in my life. Sorry for all the British people listening. But he was on speakerphone with his mother. And he thought he was in France, first and foremost. Sure, we're not far from the French border, but buddy, you're in a different country. And then he thought that this was also for World War II, which, you know, can be forgiven. But then, as the announcer said, please be quiet and respectful, don't clap, all this nonsense, his mom started singing the last post, and I was standing next to this guy mortified on his behalf. Sorry, I had to take a sip because I've been talking for damn near 15 minutes. What was I going to talk about? Oh, right. Bit of a. Well, I've been jumping from topic to topic on this. Some people just have no fucking respect. Yeah. Also, the last post, sure, they blow the last post, but then like more stuff happens. The last post was over, and this guy was just gone. It was like he vanished in thin air. At some point on this trip, we're visiting a D-Day museum, and I'm wondering if it'll be like that again. I know this is very privileged to say, but I really don't want to think about that. But yeah. Also, I've been kind of jumping from one thing to the next, so I'm gonna jump to another quote unquote random topic on this. But in my opinion, the propaganda went fucking hard. And what the UK love to do, this is a slideshow, and hopefully it'll, yes, perfect. Okay, so what the UK loved to do was involve the viewer, and you're gonna see this as it cycles through. Don't worry, Zena. A lot of it is like speaking to the viewer specifically, kind of guilt tripping, kind of going, "We need you. Why are you still standing here? We need fit men. Go enlist. Go become a nurse. Help. This is a good example. Hold up your end." War bonds were also very like. Hi, Eclipse. Here's another one, an appeal to you. A lot of propaganda was like pointing the finger to the viewer and going, "Why are you not on the front? Why are you not fighting?" Like you could see earlier with the nurses, it was not perfect timing. It was not just aimed at the men. The women were also told like, ration your food and go work in munitions factories, become a nurse, all these things to, yeah, kind of help. And World War One also helped a lot in the effort of women gaining the vote and gaining more independence, because of course the men were off at the front fighting, not all of them, but a good chunk of them. And women had to take up the quote unquote men's work, like farming and working in factories and all that stuff. And after the men came back, they were like, "You're not taking my job. I don't agree with this." And it helped, in the effort for women to gain more independence. I wish I had pictures of all the propaganda prints of my old doctor had up in her office, a huge collection of prints covering everyone. That sounds so cool. I have a little book that is specifically about knitting during the First World War that has some really cool knitted-related propaganda, because knitting was also one of the ways that people back home could help with the war effort, like I mentioned at the start of this stream, by knitting what we know as balaclavas, but at the time was known as helmets. Socks were a big one, cholera belts. There are patterns that you can still find today, though they're a little harder to read than modern knitting patterns. But I, as a pet project, have been taking old knitting patterns from the war and kind of modernizing them. Though the few times that I've tried to publish them, they were stricken down for some reason, and I don't know how else to publish them. But like there were mittens specifically made with like a separate finger specifically to pull the trigger of a gun, and stuff like that, which is very interesting. I showed this during my knitting stream, but I have a magazine from 1917 with the center fold is patterns written by the Red Cross specifically to knit a vest, a wristlet, or what we know, wrist warmers, socks that I've knitted from that. But I got so like I hated the yarn I was using, and I got so frustrated that I just made the foot like comically small because I just wanted to be done with it, because I really didn't like how they were turning out color wise. Do I actually have pictures? I do think I have a picture of the sock pattern specifically, so I'm just gonna show you because why not, right? Excuse me. Where did I keep it? Ah, there it is. Oh, that is a very big picture. Mea culpa. I'm struggling. Hold on. It wouldn't be a crow stream if it wasn't at least a little scuffed. Oh no, my background! uh, hold on. Let me fix that first. That is not the right one. Oh, the scuff continues. Hold on. Let's just control Z this. There we go. You saw a piece of it. Good enough. I'm not gonna keep messing with it. But like I said earlier too, that the Red Cross had to kind of step in and write like uniform patterns for things because people were just kind of like knitting whatever, and sometimes things would be too small, too big, too whatever. There's also a bunch of really fun cartoons at the time that I sadly didn't prep for the stream, but I could always toss them in the server if you guys would like. I could just make kind of like a resource channel for you guys to browse if that is something you would like. But like kind of poking fun of like some girls who picked up knitting needles for the first time in however long, or for the first time ever, to try and knit for the war effort. But then they like knit really misshapen socks, or they knit a. There's one really funny cartoon. Well, funny is objective. Of a guy receiving like a sock, but it's so big he can turn it into a hammock and stuff like that. And another cute little fun fact is, and this stems back to the Revolutionary War in the US. There's a podcast on it. I can link you guys if that is something you're interested in. But a thing that some women would do is when they were packaging up the knitted goods they were going to send off to the front, they would add a little note, writing their name and asking the recipient, "Are you single? Because I'm a single woman looking for a husband," or like, "I wish to converse," and like adding their address so they could start corresponding. I don't know how successful this was, but that was a thing that some women did. Or there was one very audacious case where a woman had added a note saying like, "If the recipient of this pair of socks is married, please do pass this on to one of his compatriots who is single." Which, gotta love the audacity. Hold on. Gosh. You know what? Audience participation. Is there anything else you guys would want me to talk a bit about? Because I have like a million things swimming through my head and it's really hard to just parse out one or two. Or if you guys have anything like you're curious about or whatever, throw it at me and I'm gonna do my best. This is also just a tiny bit of an excuse to let my voice rest for a second. I'm holding. Oh, there's also a little like wartime knitting song that I do think I have a recording of somewhere. Have you been to Fimi Ridge? I have not. That is something on my to-do list though. Would you make any other type of clothing from that time period? I woke up like from like a mummy task. I'm actually working on a period accurate outfit. I'm currently working on the undergarments, which is a bit of a shit show. Because since I started the project, I've also lost weight, so now it's like extra baggy on me, and I don't like what I did with the top, like, because the women's underwear of the time came in like a variety of combinations, and one of them, funnily enough, is called combinations, which was just like bloomers and like the little top you wore over it kind of attached to each other. It was kind of like a play suit sort of situation, which very tangentially related. I'm sure y'all are familiar with the French cancan. You know, with the big skirts and kicking up their legs and everything. The reason why it was so scandalous was not because, you know, they were kicking their legs up all high, but because underwear of the time had a split down the crotch, so they were essentially just flashing the audience the entire time. But yeah, I've been making that. I also want to try and make a nurse's uniform, just because I think it's cool. Would you say you were more interested in the soldiers rather than the nurses, or is it a fascination and empathy towards both? Both, actually, because I actually meant to talk about the nurses more. Good that you remind me. Hold on. I had a fun little background image, I guess. I have empathy towards. I've also been reading a lot of war diaries because I find them fascinating. One of them is actually from a VAD nurse, or voluntary aid detachment nurse. They were not like full-fledged nurses. They were volunteers who were like knowledgeable enough to help the actual nurses, but they were not sisters, because the actual nurses were referred to as sisters. The VAD nurses were not. And at the start of the war, with the VAD nurses, signing up and coming over, they were not very well liked. But one of them is like, I've read one previously, A Green Tent in Flanders, which is a very interesting read. And it is also kind of fascinating how almost casual they talk about death. Because the one I'm reading right now, it's called Dorothea's War. And she barely talks about her patients. She will say, like, oh, this poor lad was in a poor state, or oh, such and such passed away this morning, or he had a high fever and didn't make it through the night. That's the only thing she would say. And then the rest is just her talking about how they went down to the town nearby, or they had a Christmas party at one point where they all dressed up, which is really cute. But she is very, very blasé about everything else, about the injury, the death. She complains about having to give men blanket baths, and in case you don't know what that is, which I didn't, it's basically just like washing men in bed. And even the other one, the Green Tents and Founders that I read, again, she talked very kind of like almost casual about, oh, such and such died, or oh, this happened, this took place. It is slightly horrifying how casual at one point people just talk about all these things happening. Another war journal that I am reading right now is a very, very, very thorough and thick journal from a priest in a town near the front line. I forgot the name of it. It's in Dutch, so it wouldn't help you guys very much either. But he very, very detailed wrote down this many Englishmen were in town. The church was turned into an infirmary. There was an explosion near this farm. They stole the cows from that farm. This many Germans passed through. This many masses were held. This many communions were held. Very, very thorough. And that also just fascinates me. Just like the personal perspective of it all is just so deeply fascinating to me. What aspect of the nurses do you think was like the most admirable, even a little scary? Wait, you low-key answered the last part. Well, I would love to expand even more. I'm also surprised that, there have been as many people around as there are listening to me ramble. But yeah, the nurses also had to deal with a lot of, pardon my French, bullshit. Because, there is a scarcity of things at certain points. I believe there were even points where men were just fed liquor until they were drunk so they could be amputated because there were no pain medication, or was too little pain medication. And another thing is they had to learn how to deal with entirely new injuries and ailments, because World War I is also when gas started being used. Which Fun fact, and this is a not so fun, but it is a fact. The person responsible for gas is the same person responsible for modern fertilizer. It's the same sort of process. And I believe his journal is in Flanders Fields, the museum that I went to. And there's a passage in there where they did the first tests and everything went quiet in the field they tested in. No birds, nothing made noise. Everything was dead, and he immediately had the kind of like a realization of like, oh no, this is horrible. But yeah, men would get caught in that, and their lungs would be heavily affected, and different gases did different things. And gas is also used as a thing to injure, not kill. And one of the tactics, I think the Germans use this, but I could be mistaken. Don't take this for fact. There was a method of attack where they would drop gas, and then they would move up behind the lines to take. Yes, Franz Haber. Also, some of the chemical weapons of the war served as basis for the start of chemo. That I didn't know. Also, blood transfusions were pioneered during the First World War. Like, blood transfusions as in, like, from a bottle or a bag. Because blood transfusions before that were done from person to person. But during the war, they started experimenting with adding saline to blood to keep it shelf stable, for lack of a better term, to help with that. But yeah, like there was chlorine gas, there was mustard gas. In a museum in Passendale, which specifically centers around 1917, and I think the Second Battle of Passendale, they had like a little cubby where you can smell what the different gases smelled like, and one of them smells eerily pleasant. The other ones smell really, really bad. But yeah, nurses and doctors also had to learn how to deal with the after effects of what gas did to a person. And not only did it affect lungs, it also blinded people. If any of y'all are familiar with Peaky Blinders, at the start of that, there is a call to World War I veterans, and I believe there was a gentleman affected by gas. Don't quote me on that, because it's been a minute. But yeah, having to think on your feet and deal with all these horrible injuries and stuff. To circle back to the original question, that must not have been easy, and I have a deep, deep respect for these people. Also, something that is often overlooked is the fact that, for lack of a more easy way of saying is, people of color also played a big part in the war, and they are very often overlooked. This comes with the colonies. And there is an anecdote from a Chinese laborer that was brought over to help with, I believe, digging trenches. I don't remember fully what his job description was. I do know that he was a laborer, and he observed what was happening with the war. And I think he wrote this in his diary or whatever, it doesn't matter. But he's quoted as saying, if you look at these men and the barbarous way in which they're slaughtering each other, it is hard to see and believe that these people are the superior civilization. Which is very on the nose, and he's not wrong. Trauma medicine is one of the greatest and saddest advancements of war. Exactly. Also, another thing that was pioneered in the war was the fountain pen. Yeah, like there were people from India that were brought over. Chinese laborers were also brought over. And there, in Flanders Fields, there are even, I believe it was in Flanders Fields, or it was in the 1917 museum, but there are uniforms that Moroccan soldiers that, I forgot which country in Africa, terribly sorry, but that what those people would wear and what Chinese soldiers would wear, and it's really, really interesting. But they are sadly overlooked. And, you know, sex work was also, for better or for worse, a part of the war. There's also I need to fully read up on that because that is an aspect that I haven't fully delved into, but I want to. After the war, there were prostitutes who also had a limb difference or who had, some sort of disfigurement who would specifically take on clientele of the wounded veteran variety. But it also, I do believe, and this is more me speaking as a result from everything I've read on and all that. I do believe World War I also helped in not normalizing isn't maybe the correct term, but it helped kind of break the stigma a little bit when it comes to people with a limb difference or who had lost a limb or were disfigured in some way or shape or form. Because before that, the general consensus or the general attitude towards people who were missing an arm, a leg, or whatever, that was a moral failing. A lot of things that people couldn't help at the time was seen as like a moral failing for whatever fucking reason, which is an incredibly antiquated way of thinking. But if you send a bunch of boys to war, a bunch of boys lose their leg, their arms, their face, multiple limbs, and they come back, and then you kind of have to think, well, yeah, this isn't really a moral failing. They were defending their country. They were fighting for king and country, and they were wounded. That is not a moral failing. That is an act of bravery. And I do believe that World War I did help kind of shift that perspective a little. Because I feel, and a lot of people seem to be in agreement, that World War I is kind of like the jump start for the modern era. Because before that, it was still very much like ladies in long dresses completely covered up, and like war was still seen as like a gentlemanly thing that could be fought out with rules and agreements and stuff like that. And this was kind of like, yeah, no, balls to the wall, let's go. Again, that is a horrible way of saying it, but it was essentially just kind of like a moment where things just shifted, and they shifted quickly and with devastating results. And even the way it started, it could have been prevented. The start of World War I is a comedy of fucking errors. And in case you don't know how it started, there were tensions between Bosnia, Bosnia and oh fuck! Of course I forget that. I know it in Dutch, but I don't know it in English. Austria-Hungary. Serbia and Austria-Hungary. I am so sorry. I don't know why I said Bosnia. I'm terribly sorry. But there was tensions, and Archduke Franz Ferdinand went to visit Serbia on a date that was specifically very sensitive for the Serb people. And a terrorist group, I'm going to call them what they are, because they were a terrorist group, the Black Hand, decided, you know what? This is an insult. A lot of stuff happened in that specific corner of the world. But, okay, this dude has the nerve to visit our country on this very sensitive date. We're gonna kill him. And I think there were 2 attempts before Gavrilo Princip shot him. And one of them was kind of like, the first one was an explosion. Like someone threw a bomb at the car that went off, I think, with a delay, and the guy ran away and took a cyanide pill, but the cyanide was out of date, so it didn't work, and he just was sitting in, like, he tried to jump off a bridge and bite the cyanide, but the river had mostly dried out and the cyanide pill was out of date, so he's just like sitting miserable in this like half dried out river, puking his guts out. And Then there was another one, and in the aftermath of this explosion, Franz Ferdinand was like, I think they halted the parade for a while. They reconvened, and Franz Ferdinand was like, I'm going to visit the hospital with the wounded, and I'm going to be a good, gentlemanly person, and I'm going to, go to these people and, make sure they're okay. So they drive, but Franz Ferdinand had brought his personal driver, and his personal driver took a wrong turn. And the way it's told is that, Gavrilo Princip was like at a sandwich shop, and he was like, oh, I don't think we're going to be able to do it, and da-da-da-da-da. And then the car turns and rides into the street, and who is there but Franz Ferdinand? And Gavrilo Princip draws his gun, 2 shots, gets them both. I do believe Gavrilo Princip was also then apprehended and later executed for his crime. And Franz Ferdinand's last words are kind of haunting because his wife is like bleeding out next to him. And I believe his last words are like, Sophie, stay alive for the children. They both passed away. But that kind of jump-started what happened. Because there were already a lot of tensions in the Balkans, and that just was the boiling point. And I think Austro-Hungary sent an ultimatum to Serbia, and Serbia was like, we can't? Okay, we agree to a good chunk of these, but that last one is impossible. It escapes me what that condition was. And then, mobilization happened, and in a couple of months, suddenly the entire Western world was at war. It's almost... I don't want to say comedic. I've been saying a lot of things that I think are not like the good way of saying things, but whatever. But it's almost comedic how 2 shots started all this. That a wrong turn started all this. Which, by the way, that wrong turn caused the butterfly effect, and if Franz Ferdinand's driver hadn't taken a wrong turn, we wouldn't have My Chemical Romance, Twilight, and 50 Shades of Grey. Let me explain. So Franz Ferdinand gets, which sparks World War I, which then ends in the Treaty of Versailles, which then sparks World War II 20 years later. Russia got in because Russia. Where was I? Right. Then World War II happens. America gets involved because America likes to get involved in everything. And then that boils over into the tensions in the Middle East, which then results into the towers being hit. The towers being hit is witnessed by Gerard Way, who decides, I need to do something with my life. I'm going to start a band. And that caused My Chemical Romance to happen. My Chemical Romance is the inspiration for Twilight, believe it or not. And then Twilight inspired the absolute rag that is 50 Shades of Grey. So that is incredibly simplified, but that is essentially the connection. It's like one of my favorite kind of like, not party tricks, but it's like one of those things like, oh, did you know? Also, by the way, fun fact. So Belgium actually was not supposed to be involved, and it's because of us that England got involved. Because Belgium we're neutral. We're neutral territory. Unfortunately, though, we're Europe's doormat. And when we became independent, which happened in 1830, we are a very young country compared to some others. Though modern Germany is even younger, technically speaking. But when we became independent, we somehow convinced the UK to sign a treaty or sign a thing saying that if our neutrality was harmed, UK would defend us, England would defend us. And then the Schlieffen Plan happened at the outbreak of World War I, which, in case you're unfamiliar, was a plan by a military higher up called Schlieffen to circle or like go through Belgium and circle around to Paris. And that would basically mean a quick and decisive victory for Germany. Unfortunately, Belgians are really fucking stubborn. I say that as being one. And Germany actually sent a, yeah, I don't blame them. They actually sent a letter, but they were already moving through Belgium. They sent a letter to our king because our king is actually from a German noble house, von Saxon-Coburg-Gotha. And assuming, they'll say yes. What are they gonna do? And in response, their king said, no. And we proceeded to flood our own fields, blow up our own railways, all to halt the Germans, right? And a lot of misery came from this because the Germans were incredibly fucking jumpy. And they came down on certain towns with a iron fucking fist. There are stories where they would chase half the town into the church, close the doors, lock them, and light the church on fire. There are stories of over 300 people being executed because one jumpy German thought he was being shot at. A lot of barbarism happened at the start of the war in my country specifically. That also the Schlieffen Plan and Germany forcefully going through Belgium was called the I'm not gonna say it, but the sexual assault of Belgium, and the UK used this as propaganda for a while. Yeah, we were very, very stubborn. And just decided, you know what? You want to come through us? We're going to blow up all of our shit. And we're going to flood all of our fields. And we're going to make this as difficult as humanly possible. And it worked. To some degree, at least. And also, our king at the time, King Albert I have seen him referred to as the last warrior king. Because and a lot of his statues and depictions you will still find are because at this point like almost every town in Belgium has a statue of this man. He's always pictured in like his greatcoat and his helmet because he refused to leave the country and he stayed as close to the front lines as he could safely. And his wife, Queen Elizabeth. We also had a Queen Elizabeth, believe it or not, and our crown princess is also called Elizabeth. But she did some. It was, of course, mostly for show, but she visited some of the wounded and she handed out chocolate and stuff like that. And she wore a nurse's uniform, you know. But they were engaged with everything and they refused to leave. And quick tangent fun fact, I guess, is that while Belgium has a king and a queen, they are. Our king is king of the Belgians, not king of Belgium. He's king of the people, not the country, if that makes any sense. Listen, Belgian chocolate does have curative powers, in my opinion. LOL. Yeah, I mean, we don't do half bad. Hold on, let me pull up a picture of Albert and Elizabeth. Elizabeth. Hold on, this is surprisingly difficult. Oh, okay. I'll use this one. Because when I don't know if they did this a lot after or during the restoration of the Lakenhalle, but there were like different niches where saint statues and stuff were put, and in one of the niches they put these, if I can remember where I put things, which is questionable. There we go. They put these, which are King Albert and Queen Elizabeth. He's often depicted in his war garb. Question: are those the anglicized versions of their names, or are they the same in Dutch? If you want to say it in Dutch, it's Koning Albert and Koningin Elisabeth. Though, technically it's Albert, like it's pronounced French. Don't get me started. Because he actually had a Dutchified version of his name, Adalbert, which he used to sign stuff in Dutch. The only reason I know that is because I used to be an archer for a hobby, and my archery club had a signed picture from King Albert when he came to visit in, I think, 1920 something. And it was signed Adalbert, which I thought was really funny. Which was a common thing, by the way, that people would either Dutchify or Frenchify their names. In my country specifically, during the war, there was also... This is not fun, but it is something that happened. My country speaks technically 3 languages, and the fact that we speak 3 languages and that we have German as an official language is because after World War I, we got a tiny little piece of Germany as compensation for what they did to us. Yeah, I haven't done archery in a little while now because I just wasn't enjoying it very much anymore. But I used to be an archer. But wait, what was I talking about? Oh, right. So my country speaks 3 languages, but at the time, French was kind of like the language that was mostly spoken in the army and among people that had money and power and like who were well to do, right? And that caused a bit of a divide between class and language and everything, and most official documents were done in French. So if you didn't speak French, you were kind of boned. And that caused a lot of strife because one thing that would happen in the army, and I think this was mostly during the first couple of years, was that generals would give orders in French and then would tack on pour les Flamands la même chose, which means which translates to and for the Flemish people the same thing, basically meaning for like I'm not gonna repeat myself in Dutch. Fuck you, essentially. This from this unfortunately became the existence of our far right party. That kind of found its roots there, which I don't like, but it's history, whatever. And one of the things that because this is also where soldiers specifically were also kind of like pushing to have more Dutch in general, just with giving orders, with all that stuff. And one of the main things that they also tried to push is because all the gravestones for Belgian soldiers were in French. And one of the things they kind of like use as propaganda, for lack of a better term, is are you really gonna let a mother grieve for in front of a gravestone that she can't read? Which I think is a very powerful thing to say. Also now in modern day, so my country has a literal language border. Like it's cut down the middle essentially, with one part speaking Dutch and one part speaking French. And official documents in the Dutch-speaking part are done in Dutch, and public servants have to speak Dutch even if you address them in French first. And in the French-speaking part, it's vice versa. They speak to you in French, and they have to address you in French. In Brussels, it's the Wild West. But there was a push for that kind of stuff, and the sentence "pour la Flamand la même chose" is such like a nasty little thing to say. And another thing, one of the first sort of quote unquote war journals I read was from. It was actually written by the grandson of the soldier in question, who was gifted 3 notebooks in which his grandfather wrote down his entire life story, essentially. And he also Dutchified his name after, because his name had a more French lilt to it, but he made it. His name was Urbain, but after the war, he started calling himself Urban because he did not want to be associated with French-speaking people anymore. French speakers can be asked. They are. They are. They are. Having had to deal with people that just speak French and nothing else, they are. Um, yeah, that is an interesting thing about my country specifically. Also, fun fact. um, Years and years ago, there was a special exhibit in the War Museum in Brussels, I believe, and I went there with family, and they had the gun that Gavrilo Princip used, which, fun fact, in a fun fact, was of Belgian make. Oh my god, I just looked over. I've been talking for an hour and a half. That's crazy. Hold on, let me... There. Whew. Okay, are there any more questions or topics you want to toss at me? I give myself a bit of a short break. I also very fittingly have Army Dreamers stuck in my head. Are you going to be writing a book about... Funny you mentioned that. Because for some reason, a while ago, like a month ago at this point, I just sat down and I was like, I need to write. Like, not I want to, it's I need to. And I sat down and I started writing just like general brain shenanigans. Let me see if it is in Dutch, but let me see if I can pull it up and translate as I'm reading. Because I do think I had a translated version. Also, wartime medicine, I am not super well versed in, and I think we did kind of touch up, or I kind of touched upon that earlier. Hold on, let me... Okay, never mind. Well, I'll read a little bit just for funsies. I'm gonna try and translate this as best as I can, but reading something in one language and then translating it in another while reading it is not an easy feat, so bear with me, okay? I'm also gonna try and do this in a way that I don't accidentally fucking dox myself. Bloop, bloop. Okay. Let me just do that, and there we go. It's a grey, rainy April afternoon when inspiration finds me. I'm working from home, 2 coffees deep into an Excel document, when I take a break to scroll through my phone to find a podcast. I live with my headphones on, and a podcast has become my best friend over the past few weeks. While scrolling, a podcast about World War I catches my eye, and without much thought, I click play. A dramatic, deep male voice fills my ears, and off we go to Ypres, circa 1915. In the mud, with the clouds of gas surrounding us. Also, I deepled, so don't be impressed. I deepled. My head has been in the before all week. Past Monday was an annual affair, which always feels like stepping a little bit back into time, where people were bartering and selling cows on the town square. It's during my lunch break that the idea worms its way into my head to write. It's not the first time this has occurred. I've always been a creative person, and my mother loves telling me how I used to tell stories to my brother as a kid. And writing about World War I is no novelty in and of itself either. I'm not gonna bore y'all with more, but I don't know. Just I had brain worms. I still have brain worms, and this whole stream is making it so much worse. Any more questions or anything you want me to talk about? Oh, by the way, in case you're curious, the cemetery I mentioned like at the start of this stream is the Ypres Reserve cemetery. Oh, I can read this if y'all would like. It's my kind of like thought process when I saw that like age 19. I would so back this if you make an English version. Well, we'll see, because I would love to write, but like this is just like my thoughts meandering. I'm not sure if anyone would be very interested in reading that. Though it is like on my bucket list to publish a book, be that like self-published or traditional. I don't care, but you know, it is something that I want to do. Okay, I want to read this just because I made myself sad writing it originally, because I did a lot of like on my 3-day trip to Ypres, I did a lot of introspection and just kind of like sitting and thinking and being with my own thoughts, which is scary. Okay. Let me run this through DeepL first because I'm not a crazy person. Also, I redid my nails and typing is hard. Why did I make him this long? Okay. I stand in the Ypres Reserve Cemetery. It's quiet. It's silent in a way that only cemeteries can be silent. I slowly walk between the rows of headstones, so many of them known unto God. I don't notice the ages until I stop in front of a headstone and my eye catches the number 19. 19 years old. That's almost 10 years younger than me, date of writing, and I fall silent for a moment. This is a moment of introspection, one of many that I experienced throughout the whole weekend. I wonder how he died. Was he scared? Was it instantaneous? Did he call for his mother? Did he take a moment to think about home? We're never gonna know. The poor thing is buried in Belgium, not even home in England. I also wonder if his parents ever made the pilgrimage to Belgium, whether his mother cleaned his tombstone with tears in her eyes, while his father fought back tears a little bit further with his hat in his hands. I don't know. His headstone is one of the better maintained in the entire cemetery, though, and I wonder if this is maybe a pity thing. Maybe the workers are maintaining it just a little bit better because he was so young. Or maybe there's still a distant relative that 100 years after his death is still taking care of him. I don't know. I'm doing a really dumb grin and like doing a thumbs up at the non-existent camera. Sorry, I get really like nervous sharing my writing. I shouldn't though, because I've been writing fanfic for a really long time and people generally seem to like it, but you know, it's still like, you know, I'm not gonna expand. But yeah, I do think I'm not gonna let the stream go for too much longer because I can feel myself getting tired. But I don't know, I had a lot of fun. I don't know if it was entertaining for you guys, but it was for me. Oh, thank you. Yeah, I had a lot of moments during that weekend where I was just like, I had a moment where I just stood still and like thought about something and the implications, or just like in the chapel, for example, where I was just like crying with this really heavy feeling in my chest of I am in a place where a guy probably said his last prayers before he met God, you know? It's humbling, I suppose. It's very humbling. Also, apologies if you can hear my neighbors screaming. They do not have an inside voice. That seems to be very common with neighbors in an apartment block, it feels like. Mm. Also, to circle back to the Wilfred Owen poem that I really like because it shows just the kind of contrast between the home front and how Wilfred himself assumedly felt. Another good book that kind of echoes that sentiment is All Quiet on the Western Front. Because it also is just like, it shows the futility of it all in gruesome detail. And Remarque did a beautiful job, in my opinion, just painting a picture of how kind of useless things were and how these men were just like trying to find their way in something that felt unending and horrendous and horrible. And the ending is also just gut wrenching. There's also they made a movie of it on Netflix that I watched majority of, but they did some things that I disagree with. But it's a really good movie anyway, just very, very bleak. So be prepared if you want to watch that. And All Quiet on the Western Front is not a very thick book. I've read it a couple times now. It is a quick read, I would say. But again, it is very bleak. It is so bleak. So, yeah. What's something else I was gonna mention? My history teacher made us watch the original All Quiet on the Western Front. Wasn't the original actually like filmed with World War I veterans? I remember something like that. I know there was a movie filmed in the 20s with actual World War I veterans. I think it was All Quiet on the Western Front. Don't quote me on that. But yeah, I do find it important that stuff like that is also like talked about and taught and maintained, quote unquote. Because especially America is guilty of this, and sorry for calling y'all out, but America has this idea of like going to war and the heroicism and, you know, the worshipping of the military. And then when you look at the details and you look up close to things that happened and personal accounts and letters and journals and pictures and everything, these men were fucking miserable. It was a horrendous situation to be in even worse conditions. And you didn't know what day or what moment could be your last. And with all these things that are happening, and death on a scale that had not been seen before. Like, even with planes that were starting to be used for war. Call America out all you want. I should have transferred to Belgium when I had the chance. Yeah, America is getting more and more scary by the day. I don't like it. But where was I going with this? But I do think it's easy to get lost in heroism and the hero worship. But I do think it's important to, you know, be honest. It's not all dying for king and country and heroism and all that nonsense. It was miserable, plain and simple, and futile and wasteful, and so many people died for 2 meters of land that would be taken back the next day. Horrendous. Yet still, I find it incredibly fucking fascinating. What else was I gonna say? Like, an excerpt from the first like real war journal I read is that to kind of boost morale a little, they held a sort of impromptu performance, and one of the soldiers had like a makeshift tutu, and he had like his pants stripped up to above his knees, and like was pretending to be a ballerina to entertain the other soldiers. It was kind of like a review show, and a bomb dropped right next to the stage, instantly killing the guy. Like, but I will say that the U.S. did jump in later in the war, 1917 to be April 1917 to be precise, and they did help tremendously because the European countries were fucking exhausted. Sorry for all my cussing. And then in came USA, the US of A, with guys that were better fed, stronger, fresh troops. They were also taller. I don't know why people like pointing that out, but they were also taller because, you know, Europe has been basically starving, and the US had also been helping with relief efforts and stuff like that. One fun little detail is that there was a fabric shortage with the uniforms and everything that needed to be made, and flour companies started picking up on the fact that women were using the flour sacks to make clothing, so they started printing like cute little designs on the flour sack. I love that little detail. Overpaid, oversexed, and over here. But yeah, the U.S. did help us, and I think without the U.S. and Canada. By the way, the Geneva Convention largely exists because of the bullshit that Canada did. So don't be deceived. Because one of the horrible things that the Canadians used to do was to trick the Germans, and they would toss over like cans of like corned beef and stuff like that, and food and like stuff like that. And then when the Germans least expected, they would toss over another thing, and it would be a live grenade. So that's the kind of stuff they pulled. So don't be deceived. The Canadians aren't always nice. But without them, I do think things would have maybe ended differently. Also, the U.S. troops were called doughboys, though no one is sure where that originated from. I do think it's a very endearing nickname, though. Because a lot of different troops got different nicknames. I do think the Americans also called Johnnies. I could be wrong. The British were called Tommies. The Germans were referred to as the Huns. I don't think the Belgian army got a nickname, but you know, that were terms that were being used. Also, do you guys know like those rattle things at soccer? They're like hold on, let me pull up a picture because it's hard to explain. Okay, it's maybe not the best picture, but it's the first one that I could grab. This is... I could just share my screen. Will I? No. These things. You see them at soccer matches and stuff. I don't know if overseas you guys know these. This is also a thing that was used in World War One. They would like spin those to warn for gas attacks. It's like one of those things where the original use is often forgot. In Mexico, we call them matracas. That's a fun name. But yeah, I actually only learned that recently by going to a museum and seeing those in like the cabinets. Like, wait a minute. Hi, Sweet Angel. Unfortunately, you're a little late to the party. I'm probably gonna round off in a little bit, but it's good to have you either way. Oh, also, did you guys know Tolkien fought in World War One? I think he was in this. He fought in the Somme, I believe. Though I think that's probably fairly well known. that he was a World War I veteran, but yeah. Same with the creator of Winnie the Pooh. He was also a World War I veteran. I thought I was a lot better from being sick than I was. Yeah, I think I'm mostly out of things to talk about unless someone throws something at me again and sets me off on a different tangent. But I do think that I am largely yammered out. I do really, really appreciate that y'all give me space to talk about the things I'm interested in. I guess I know this is definitely not everyone's cup of tea, because it is a difficult topic to talk about and stuff. But yeah, if you guys would like, I can put all the stuff and things I've talked about in a separate channel in my Discord. That way you can look at it in your own leisurely time. Because I have a lot of resources to share if anyone would want them. But yeah, maybe I can do more of these like kind of info dumpy streams because I do like talking about the things I like. And there's a lot of things, not like 2 hour worth of conversation kind of things that I could talk about, but I do want to host like a thing with a few other creators. It'll probably happen on Twitter, where we talk about queer history. So that is something that I've been meaning to like really set up. So it might be a space. I really need to coordinate that. But I would totally be down to talk more about stuff if you guys want to hear me yammer and have me as background noise for whatever else you're doing. But yeah, I think I'm going to end it here. And I thank you for being here, and I will try my best to not have such a long pause between streams again, because I do want to do this more often. Yeah, me and Faye were indeed talking about it for a while, but then, you know, life. Because I did have like 2 trips, and then I got sick for a week and a half, so didn't really have time. But I have nothing else planned in my life until like September, so I have time. I'm gonna see if other people have time too. So again, thank you for being here, and I will catch you guys later.